Did you know that WarMECH is in a lot of other RPGs? You might have clicked on this all-encompassing WarMECH video, mainly due to WarMECH's or Death Machine's appearance in FF1, and maybe you want to know its stats and maybe a strategy for beating it. Well, cool, first of all, thank you for clicking, and secondly, heck yeah, I can do that. But if you're looking for some relief about spending hours looking for WarMECH on Tiamat's bridge and the Flying Fortress, the only thing I can really say here is good luck and just know that you're not alone. I once was filming a Let's Play and it took 3 hours. And then when I finally did run into little old WarMECH, he fled. It took another 35 minutes to find him, and then he destroyed my party in one move. So just know, as much as it sucks to try to find him, it can always be worse. Alright, here's WarMECH's stats. We'll get into the fun stuff in just a bit. So there are different stats that WarMECH has that are dependent upon which version you're playing. But ultimately, I can lump them into 2 categories. The NES version and everything else. The NES version of WarMECH is a straightforward beast of an enemy. It's got 1000 HP. The damage it puts out is somewhere between 128 and 256. It has 80 physical defense, 200 magic defense, 201 accuracy, making its attacks insanely painful. And when defeated, WarMECH will grant you 32,000 experience points in Gil, making it not only worth it for the clout of saying you've beaten it, but also, wow, that's a lot of experience in Gil. Now for everything else. Take the HP of the NES version and double it, and keep nearly everything else about the same. That's really the only important info to take away. There might be some minor changes, but overall, just the HP changes really needed to know. Alright, so for strategy. First, WarMECH's Pixel Remaster battle script is pretty easy. 48.08% chance to attack and to nuke, a 3.85% chance to flee. Anything prior to the Pixel Remaster is 75% normal attack, 25% nuke. Although in prior versions excluding the NES version, if your party is level 61 or higher, WarMECH will flee. It generates 5% of its total HP, which will equal to 100 HP, except on the NES, which, due to a programming bug, surprise, surprise, 3 generated HP per round. That's it. So your ability to beat this thing comes down to a few simple components. How high your level is, what equipment you have, simply how lucky you are, and if you're beaten down by the time you made it through the Flying Fortress. There's an easy way to get through the later dungeons in FF1 with relative ease, especially on the Pixel Remaster. But first, you probably already know about the WarMECH FF1 challenge that took place in the old magazine Nintendo Power way back in 1990, which is how it's assumed The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past got the Chris Houlihan room. But I'll bet you didn't take a closer look at this contest to see that second place winners got one of 50 FF Crystal Orbs. Dude, do you know what I would give to have one of these? I mean, I don't have much, but like, and last I saw there was one of these on sales for an astounding $250,000 a while back. Even if I had that amount, I still wouldn't give that much. I mean, it's neat, but, well, I don't know. Regardless, I suppose there's worse things you can spend that kind of money on. Anyway, back to getting through the later dungeons in FF1 fairly easily. Basically, so I'm gonna simplify this tactic for you. Attack with your heavy hitters. Use the item Healing Helm every round with your healer, and an item like Thor's Hammer, which casts Thundara. Hit the auto battle button, or if you're not playing a version of the game that has auto battle, use the cursor memory function. And if you're not playing a version that has that, well, choose those commands every time, and power through those dungeons with little worry. So when you do finally get into a battle with this thing in FF1, which might take a while due to its 1 in 64 chance of appearing, or to put it in another numerical value, a 0.0156 chance of showing up for any encounter. And this is different on the NES version, which is a 3 in 64 chance of it showing up, which equals to a 0.0468 chance. The first thing you're going to want to do is buff your characters with defense and attack boosting items and spells. Treat this encounter like it's the final boss, because in some versions, WarMECH is more difficult than the final boss. Use your healer to set up Blink and Invisora to keep the party at maximum health during the whole thing. The more items you can use, the better to save on NP costs. You do not want to run out of spells during this fight. Happened to me once. The thing about using Protect or Protect drinks is, in order to have any sort of protection against an enemy as powerful as WarMECH, you're gonna have to waste turns stacking them repeatedly to get any effect. But if safety is your concern, I ain't gonna stop you. So on to the strategy. Black magic users need to spam haste and temper a few times on each of your heavy hitters, and then switch to using flare or, in desperate times, healing items. Do take note that temper does not work in the NES version, so don't waste your time with it. Or Gil. Gil's hard to come by in that game in the beginning. Your heavy hitters should absolutely be using Giant's Gloves to cast Saber on themselves, but again, not in the NES version because Giant's Gloves don't exist. In the later versions like the Pixel Remaster or Dawn of Souls, Hermes Sandals can be used instead of the haste spell with your Black Mage. With all of these set in place, and hopefully without WarMECH wrecking the party before you can get these things in place, WarMECH should go down after a fairly difficult fight. But did you know that this isn't the only game where our beloved Death Machine is found? He's in, get this, 17 other games, and he looks and acts completely different in some of them. I was originally going to bring this up in my Final Fantasy Multiverse video. Please click this card if you haven't seen it. But with the appearance and actions of Death Machine changing throughout some of the iterations, it gave me an interesting theory, and it ties in a little too perfectly with that video I just talked about. If WarMECH or Death Machine exists in all of these other universes, sometimes looking identical to its FF1 counterpart, is my theory correct about each and every FF game being canon? Or maybe throughout time and traveling through the interdimensional rift, people in the various game worlds have altered Death Machine's appearance and actions to be tamed down and not used for some crazy war that the Lufenians originally built it for. Can we then take that information and assume that if WarMECH's appearance is similar to the original, are those specific dimensions closer in the timeline? Take Final Fantasy Legend 1 and 2. We will ignore the spelling of the creature in Final Fantasy Legend 2 because WarMECH sounds like McDonald's made a sandwich during Judgment Day, but it looks very similar to the original appearance. I know that FF Legend is actually the Saga series, but this poses an interesting, albeit far-fetched question. Could Final Fantasy Legend or the first Saga game take place in one of the Final Fantasy 1 dimensions that exists? Maybe it takes place in Dawn of Souls or the PSP's extra dungeons. It's a bit silly and you kinda gotta stretch a bit, but that's the point of theories. So what other FF games does Death Machine show up in? I'm glad you asked. In FF4, wow, that's literally just ahead, this weird version only shows up in the Game Boy Advance version of the game and the Complete Collection. It uses literal instant kill attacks and drops a potion when you defeat it. Congrats, you got a potion. Meanwhile, in the after years, it shows up looking identical to the FF1 release. Which, does that mean that FF4, the after years, is closer to the original timeline as FF1? That's another video for another day, moving on. In FF6, Death Machine shows up as this helicopter enemy thing, and it primarily uses death-related attacks. Death, level 5 death, and blaster, which instantly kills a party member. It's super interesting to note that in FF7 and in Crisis Core, it kind of looks similar to the FF1 version, kind of like a cross between the sweeper enemies and WarMECH, or WarMECH if you're feeling snacky. Again, just like in FF6, it's relegated to mostly death-related attacks. In the aforementioned FF Legend 1 and 2, it's a very powerful boss that uses abilities like Missile and Nuke to decimate your party, and even though it appears in a few more games, I'm only going to bring one more up. In Final Fantasy XIV, everything changes. It's actually classified as a type of Magitech armor, which kind of solidifies my theory I mentioned earlier. Its appearance is based off the original design down to the coloring. But since it's classified as Magitech in FF14, does that explain the Empire's tech building in Final Fantasy VI? And if it does that further mean that FF6 and FF1 are closer in time to each other? I need your opinion, so please let them be heard in the comments. I'll be down there too, trying to make sense of this whole video. My name is Lenard Phillips, and you just explored the Returner's Hideout. Love you.